Hi, I'm Cam. I used to spit, now I make flicks. The first two parts of this series were about the many suspicious degrees of Rashad Richey, the supposedly progressive host of Indisputable. Since Richey announced an impending lawsuit in his most recent response video, while looking like he was about to cry.
But I see now that a part two and other people are grabbing the commentary. Well, it has to be done.
I figured making another one about him alone would be overkill. This one's about the network itself, specifically their leaders, Cenk Uygur, that's how the founder of TYT, Cenk Uygur pronounces his name, by the way, and the self-labeled politically homeless Anna Kasparian. Though they've both done a lot of great work in the media for decades, and there's no way I can erase thousands of videos pushing progressive messaging and causes, many people on the left see them as deeply compromised, in more ways than one. I'm also not letting their COO and former CEO, Jack Gerard, off the hook either. You don't get to fade to black just because you ain't a celebrity. Assuming all of y'all have heard of this YouTube OG news organization would be a mistake. So let's run that down real quick. The Young Turks is an American progressive news network founded by Cenk, Ben Mankiewicz, and Dave Kohler in 2002. They actually launched on Sirius satellite radio in the early days, then hopped on YouTube and Twitch when those platforms rolled out. Anna worked her way into a partner position fairly early on, and even took over editorial control after Cenk became a politician. TYT is co-hosted by Cenk and Anna on the flagship broadcast, with a gang of shows targeting different left-leaning demographics. A variety of hosts anchor those shows, including our best friend, Rashad. I hear everybody loves John Iadarola and The Damage Report.
There is not a pure soul at the network than John, I'll be honest.
I love to hear it. I've heard great things about sports and politics commentator J.R. Jackson, OG news anchor David Schuster, and I've heard of Nina Turner through the grapevine. Everybody else doesn't ring a bell, but they got a lot of shows, bruh. At any given time of day, one of their shows is live, which seems like it was the whole goal of building so many spinoffs in the first place. I interviewed Dan Evans, aka Dan from the Internet, a former producer and guest host for the Young Turks, and collaborated with their former editor, writer, and co-host, Hank Thompson, who's been eyeballs deep in his own expose covering the scandal around TYT's union-busting saga called Tell the Truth, Cenk. I'll be including snippets of that, but over an hour of it is available on YouTube right now, and they're previews, but incredibly solid. Both of them reached out to me when they heard I was covering this, laid out some pretty strong evidence in Hank's case, and some important background info in Dan's case. I also reached out to former TYT contributor Jeff Wiggins from We Gon' Be Alright, who linked me to the videos made by other former contributors discussing why they left, or, in the case of Francesca, got banned by TYT. You'll see clips from them throughout this piece as well. I'll be clear right now that I'm not attacking anyone. My constructive criticism has nothing to do with the network's contributors, producers, writers, or on-air talent beyond Cenk, Anna, and Richey. After reviewing all the evidence, my conclusion is that despite all the measurable good this network has done for progressive causes, representing one of the strongest checks to Republican media dominance over the past 20 years, their corporation is losing favor with their left-leaning fan base for very clear corporation-related reasons. The core values listed on the Young Turks website are not consistently supported by the actions and words of their leadership, and the sum total of these actions is much more reminiscent of naked capitalism than it is progressive. For the purposes of this video, here's the definition of progressive straight from the US State Department. Progressives are, quote, interested in furthering social and political reform, curbing political corruption caused by political machines, and limiting the political influence of large corporations. Rashad ain't off the hook either. We'll cover his past affiliation with conservative figures and wild statements about progressives in one of his dissertations, but I gotta light up his employers first for me to make this point effectively. Let's pay the bills, then get to it. Shout out to my longtime sponsor, Aura, for making these investigations possible. I'll keep it quick. So this time when I logged in, Aura hit me with an update on one of the data brokers they checked out for me. This is happening nonstop while I'm eating, sleeping, making these videos, you get it. What's different about this factual data broker is that they actually didn't have my information. I haven't seen this before, but Aura lets me know when they don't find anything. That's dope. I really can't ask for more as far as transparency goes. I mentioned last time that I was going to explain more about the vault. It's what it sounds like, a safe place for crucial info and documents like your IDs, your IP, passport, etc. It's sectioned out by category. I only have one checking account on file for now, but you can log in a brokerage, savings, and more. Try Aura out for yourself using my link aura.com/CamJames for 2 weeks absolutely free. On this channel, we protect each other from scams, break down politics and culture, speak truth to power, and talk our way into legal threats. Let's get to it.
Say my name. You acting kinda shady.
Back in 1991, when I was saying my first English words, Cenk Uygur, a Turkish East Brunswick, New Jersey native, was a senior management major at UPenn, writing for their newspaper, the Daily Pennsylvanian. He called his column How You Like Me Now, Baby, which screams preppy Gen X, but I'll let that one go. And in this article called Historical Fact or Falsehood, he uses 1,200 words to convince readers that the Armenian genocide did not happen. I've put the whole thing in a description in case y'all want to read it. He was really going in, talking about what 69 American professors wrote to Congress, nice, gassing up those professors' qualifications ad nauseum to make sure we believe him, like another person we know, and even leaning on the words of a rear admiral working for the US government who called the genocide misinformation. What actually happened is that the Ottoman Empire's officials were shook at the prospect of Armenians joining the Russian war effort, so they wiped 1.5 million of them out via executions and forced marches. And yes, forced marches are a form of genocide. Remember the Trail of Tears? That was an American genocide committed against Native Americans, as an example. Fast forward to 2025, and Cenk is on the Lex Fridman podcast discussing what made him take that stance originally and how he came to disavow that article and admit that the Armenian genocide did actually happen.
Growing up in any tribe, whether it's a religious tribe or an ethnic tribe, you're going to get indoctrinated into that tribe's way of thinking. I'm in college and I read about some battle that the Ottoman Empire lost. And I'm like, that can't be right. The Turks have only lost one war, World War I, right? And I was like, oh my God, I'm an idiot. I got taught that in 3rd grade in Turkey. Of course that's not true. That's ridiculously untrue, right? I read the Turkish version, right? And the Turkish version has all of this evidence, right? So it's real in that it exists. And that one was so indoctrinated that it was tough to let go. And so Anna and I disagree on things from time to time. And we've been co-hosting now she's been at the Young Turks for 18 years and co-hosting for, almost 18. And so she's Armenian. It just dawned on me like, no, this too was obviously propaganda. So at that point, once you realize that, it becomes easier. That's why I'm trying to unplug people from the matrix.
Okay, bet. He changed his mind when he realized he was wrong. Here's the problem with that though. He still refuses to change the name. Anna defended it too in a now deleted tweet, even though she's Armenian. Quote, we've explained the name 1 billion times. You know what it means and you know the type of coverage we do. To perpetuate the same lies over and over again, which of course directs harassment and disinformation towards me, is an odd move, especially right now, end quote. Given what we know about this historical event, it's like calling your progressive news organization the Hitler Youth. Anna knows this and defended it for one reason. She didn't like how the public was making her feel about it. Cenk did the same thing for the same reason. Of course, harassment isn't okay in any circumstances, but public pressure is another thing entirely. As a person who's worked at marketing agencies for most of my adult life, it seems as if this pretty cut and dry Washington Redskins-ass situation has a very obvious solution, but it would be a pain for them logistically. Any organization that publishes media on the scale that they do, which is thousands of videos a year, would need to dedicate a whole month of some unpaid intern's time to make sure any name change is reflected as widely as possible and to make sure their SEO and marketing campaigns are flipped to match. By refusing to change the name and complaining about the public pointing out this obvious conflict with their progressive ideals, Cenk and Anna are putting their comfort above doing the right thing. This is what's called a theme. That was the pay with TYT.
No one will say it's great. I will say Hassan has previously talked about being underpaid at TYT, and I'll even contest to that because, funny enough, I was paid more than him.
Wow.
So
That says a lot by itself. Yeah.
Baby, I wasn't like family with Jenk or anything, but because I was such a young kid and because I'd shown such interest at a young age, Jenk sort of protected me in a lot of different ways.
Your uncle was letting everybody steal your sales deals too.
That's
His
true.
uncle would like let him massage a sales deal to the last thing, then someone would swoop in and close it and take the commission.
Objectively, Hassan was like a host. He would leave, especially near the end of his time at TYT. He would leave and start doing his Twitch streams. He would basically come in, do the script we worked on, leave, and then that was it. I'd be there producing 2 or 3 shows, so like I better have been paid more. But that's all to say that it was under market rate for probably the job I was doing, but in the world of digital media, it wasn't obscene. There are other people who were definitely getting paid under market rate, and I think there were some before the union efforts. I remember hearing some mutterings over some people who were working who eventually started forming the union. So like editors, studio technicians, anyone who would be covered under IATSE, they were talking about being like legally underpaid the like California minimum wage for a salaried employee. So I was aware that those kind of things were happening even before 2020.
I had this IP, this intellectual property of the show that I like built out of the for free that I did because I wanted to do it on the side. It's something I wanted, and I knew they were not gonna originally they were not gonna let me do it unless I do it for free, which is kind of lame.
And this is your uncle's company.
Yeah, it's my uncle's company. It got very popular. And instead of giving me additional funds to be like, here, let's build out the show more, let's give you a writer, because I did this in the supply closet, basically. I put a green screen up there and I started filming myself. They were like, oh yeah, we're going to take this IP and we're going to give it to all the other hosts so we can like make more of the same type of videos without spending any extra money. And that's when I was like, damn, I have no ownership over this. My uncle was like, oh, this is an opportunity for me to hire someone and skirt some serious like labor regulation.
Why is a network that proclaims itself to be the home of progressives, a main supporter of Bernie Sanders and all these other different people, trying to start doing some union busting tactics that are straight out of the book?
In 2020, Cenk tried to prevent his staff from unionizing, using every union busting tactic in the playbook. This isn't something a progressive does. And it also isn't breaking news. The whole saga has played out across the media pretty far and wide for years now. The union went public on February 12th, 2020, catching TYT leadership by surprise. And I'll let Hank take it from here.
I also want to shout out Hank Thompson.
Hi, I'm Hank. I worked at TYT as well as for the Jimmy Dore Show in various iterations over the years. I was a long-time paying member before I began working for the company in 2013. As a video editor and lizard massager, I was on the ground floor of this organizing drive.
This Twitter page pops up out of nowhere, right? And it's TYT Union.
They'd used card check, an election process in which 50%, little help, Bernie.
If 50% of workers in a bargaining unit plus one sign a card saying they want to join a union, they will have a union. End of discussion. End of discussion.
End of discussion.
Fine. End of relationship.
After 9 days of silence, the company formally rejected voluntary recognition, saying they were prepared to voluntarily recognize the union, but only after a second election was conducted on terms more favorable to the company. While they wanted people to believe they were protecting the democratic will of the workers, it was in fact, as labor journalist Sarah Jones pointed out, classic union busting. Their statement was, put another way, total
bullshit.
What followed was a period of union busting that seemed right out of the union busting playbook. Every single tactic was a tried and true technique for disrupting solidarity, save one: publicly smearing the workers' integrity, intelligence, and motivations by accusing them of being in a conspiracy with Cenk Uygur's political opponent.
Seriously, go watch that. I've linked it on screen and in the description. We're gonna take a closer look at some of the things Anna said that Hank put on screen, then move to Cenk's statements. Hank and Cenk are different people, by the way. Please pay attention. In these tweets, Anna's going ham on IATSE, which stands for the International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees. It's a union representing entertainment workers, like the ones at TYT. Criticizing a union for endorsing someone who seems to not be very progressive is fair game, right? But Anna wasn't doing this out of the goodness of her heart. She was indirectly lashing out at her own coworkers.
While I'm personally supportive of unions, that's not a good start. This feels like it's done in bad faith. She finishes by calling the situation extremely suspicious.
Why would you criticize the decisions of a union your coworkers are deciding to join, as if that has anything to do with whether they deserve representation or not? You have representation.
As a worker, Anna's had personal experience with how scary asking for a raise can be.
I don't like freaking asking for raises or negotiating. That's why I have an agent. My agent negotiates that stuff for me because I can't do it, right? So,
Well, it's an uncomfortable process for everyone.
the worst.
She's right. It is the worst. Since very few have a private union, an agent, a company-wide union would elevate everyone out of the intimidating subjugation Anna's agent helps her avoid.
Right, that's called having your own personal union. As Hank went on to point out, you're doing this to defend your boss. Now, what did Cenk say about it?
Our relationship got off to a bumpy start in the beginning.
As for Cenk, he did a lot more than just speak on the air. And this conflict was a lot more than just a bumpy start. He and TYT leadership spoke with the company's bankroll. I rarely get to say this, but Hank did some of this investigative work for me already.
The other tactics, all documented in these 4 articles, none of which the company has refuted, might seem so familiar because, as NLRB filings would later reveal, the Young Turks hired 2 anti-worker management-side law and consultancy firms. Since the home of progressives is largely member-funded, it stands to reason that the audience deserves to know how much they spent on union busting, if any. How much member money did TYT send to these anti-worker law firms?
For those listening in the car or while doing dishes, he just pulled up the receipts showing that TYT's 2 hired firms specialize in union busting. Here's a notice TYT had to post in their office for 60 days after violating Section 7 of the agreement with the National Labor Relations Board. Remember how TYT leadership said they voluntarily agreed with the agreement and were prepared to accept unionization? All that language is a front. If they wanted to agree to that first majority vote, also referred to as card check, they could have. It was a lie. There's a lot more to this story, but Hank's got y'all covered for that. We gotta move on to the next reason I call TYT the throne of fake progressives: blatant transphobia. But first, I came across this NGO report page in my research, and they were talking about TYT being pro-Israel while providing zero proof of it.
Recently, a media outlet did a hit job on us, and because we were criticizing Israel, and we support others who criticize Israel, they said, well, that's it, you're anti-Semitic. In fact, Jew haters, okay. Now, my proposition is that they're liars, and they never clarified to people that we actually speak out against anti-Semitism all the time, and we say, do not conflate Jews and Israel. That is a government, and our Jewish American brothers and sisters are one of us.
Do not blame the entire Jewish population for the war crimes that are committed by the Israeli government, because I'm not an idiot. I can tell the difference between the two. And I judge people as individuals, not as an entire group. I don't believe in blood guilt.
As we've said on the Young Turks now literally thousands of times, it is not about Jews. If you conflate the two, that is going to cause not just terrible anti-Semitism, but it's irrational and it's wrong. Jewish people are not getting their orders from stupid Netanyahu. Will some of them listen to him like Larry Ellison? Of course, because those are pro-Israel zealots, but that does not represent all Jewish people at all. Please, please do not believe them when they say such outrageous things that drive up anti-Semitism. Israel does not represent all Jewish people. Nobody called my friends, Jewish friends and family, and said, hey, you guys want to buy TikTok to do Israeli propaganda? Hey, would you like to kill more Palestinians? They didn't do that.
Do not conflate the Jewish people with the far-right terrorist regime that's currently governing Israel.
One of the few things that's redeemable for TYT right now are when Cenk and Anna go onto shows like Piers Morgan, and they're some of the only anti-Zionist voices, and they hold pretty strong positions on this. And, you know, I was moderately amused by Anna Kasparian slapping Bill Maher across his own podcast for his, you know, bad takes.
I don't like Israel as an ally to the United States. I don't. I think Israel is committing war crimes, atrocities, all sorts of disgusting behavior by this Israeli government and its military that should be condemned.
Yeah, I think they're pretty clear on that one, fam. Okay, the transphobia. I've been on the internet for a long time, and religious black people usually get really mad about me being an ally. So we got to put some definitions on screen as we enter the transphobia section. The UK organization Transactual sums it up well. Quote, the core value underlying all transphobia is a rejection of trans identity and a refusal to acknowledge that it could possibly be real or valid. This includes, but is not limited to, attempting to remove trans people's rights, misrepresenting trans people, abuse, systematically excluding trans people from discussions about issues that directly affect them, and other forms of discrimination. What did TYT do or say to qualify as transphobic? This is where I bring in Bonnie, a former contributor for the network. They made this video about why they left.
We're mostly going to be focusing on their transphobia, which they have been escalating rapidly, which I guess is something that everybody really predicted would happen starting, I think, about 6 months ago, 4 months ago, when Anna Kasparian put out a tweet complaining about the use of the term birthing person, which is really, really funny because she kept on talking about how, like, it erases women, and it minimizes womanhood down to just body parts. Except for it literally doesn't. Everybody very immediately pointed out that that's a silly thing to say, that in fact, thinking that the term woman and birthing person are completely interchangeable actually does reduce women to body parts.
It was from Dr. Michelle Morrison. It said the urgency of this moment is clear. Mortality rates of birthing people are too high, and babies born to Black and Puerto Rican mothers in this city are 3 times more likely to die in their first year of life than babies born to non-Hispanic white birthing people.
I'm speculating that she doesn't want to say mothers because mothers is gendered and she's worried about offending birthing people. Like, birthing people, really? Come on. For me, it's not even like, oh, I don't want to be inclusive and I don't want to think of, you know, transgender people. It's the phrasing, like, it just makes you sound like a weird object that, like, you're a vessel and nothing more. Like, birthing people just sounds weird.
All right, let me break this idea down for everyone in my audience who's gonna argue about it. Inclusive language isn't developed to force you to go along with it. I'll give you an example, cisgender. In my last video, I dropped that term in reference to me, and a few of y'all pulled the same shit Anna pulled in this situation. Righteous anger over being forced to call yourself cisgender. What did I say in response? That nobody asked you to call yourself anything. This language isn't created for no reason to make progressives feel better or shame everybody else. Cisgender was first popularized on the internet by a biologist in 1994. You know, a science person. There's competing ideas that it originated as far back as 1914 in German literature, but it ain't new either way. Y'all act like transgender people ran in a room and told you what you're allowed to say. Y'all act like they did something wild, like prevent you from getting medical care or threaten your reproductive rights. To address this specific term, birthing person, it isn't the same as woman. Opponents will just say everyone with a uterus is a woman and storm out the room. Well, now that you're gone, the rest of us can acknowledge that trans men can also have uteruses or uteri. If a politician or public figure has to choose a term to address legislation or policy towards everyone who's able to give birth, what else would they say? You might not like the sound of it, which is fine. It's pretty awkward. I think we can come up with something better personally. I like birth squad. What isn't up for debate is that the term has a real purpose.
Like, while you might not enjoy the technical language, that awkwardness is inevitable in this current climate and necessary because we're trying to, like, fortify walls right now as trans erasure is widespread right now. Like there's a barrage of deliberately trans exclusionary language, which is what some of the awkward, stilted terminology is meaning to beat back.
Anna's too smart to not see that, which reinforces my point that she doesn't want to let go of these popular stances. Popular on the right, specifically. She has that in common with Cenk. Y'all have become Karens. Believe it or not, this debate over terminology is the tip of the iceberg. This gets way worse.
Cenk seemed convinced of this idea that I'm living in some sort of bubble. They've even said it on the air, that people fighting for trans rights are all living in some sort of bubble. I was like, no, Cenk, you don't understand. I matched with a random person on Tinder, and the first thing that they started talking to me about is how transphobic TYT has been lately. Because I think that they had just kind of figured out who I was. And Cenk was like, no, see, you're living in a bubble. And it's like, yeah, okay, buddy. That completely random person I matched with on Tinder is just part of the bubble that I'm magically living in. But really, that kind of gave me the vibe of like, oh, Cenk really thinks that like every trans person is part of some sort of ideology, that we're of like a strict like political viewpoint, and that we don't just exist as like a type of person that exists, you know?
So we got Cenk generalizing all trans people as living in a bubble, which is somehow both condescending and transphobic. They're not a hive mind. This ain't sci-fi, bruh. Next, we're back to Anna as she complains about teens being given puberty blockers and gender-affirming care.
I pointed out something that Anna had said on the air, where I was like, hey, Anna said this bit about doctors giving hormone therapy to children because they were afraid of being called transphobic. And I was very clear. I was like, you know that's not happening, right? Like, you know that that isn't happening. And Cenk's response was, you know, I don't know. See, I could see it happening, though. And I'm like, no, but you couldn't. Because, you know, if that actually did happen, that would be medical malpractice, and it would be like a federal case to just give kids hormone replacement therapy because you didn't want to seem transphobic. That's ridiculous. On its face is ridiculous.
Then there was what happened to Jesse Singal, which I found disgusting. I didn't know about that until at some point this year, I would say earlier this year.
With the trans stuff? Jesse's been on the show before. Yeah, he's done great.
Jesse Singal is a good faith, I think, critical thinker. I haven't seen anything from Jesse Singal that communicates to me that he is a transphobe, that he is a bad person. He did straight news reporting on basically what, you know, some of the risks could be when it comes to transitioning literal kids. I learned that I was wrong about a bunch of other things, right? So for instance, it is a lie that puberty blockers are reversible. In some cases, they are not. And they can cause irreparable harm. And look, you might think, okay, but you got to do a balancing act. And if a child or if a teenager has severe gender dysphoria, and it would actually be better for that person to go on puberty blockers. Okay, I mean, we should be able to balance that out. But my point here is withholding the information because you don't like the information getting out there ain't the way to go, because that destroys any opportunity for us to actually have a good faith debate about what we should do moving forward.
But I think the real icing on the cake here is this tweet where Anna Kasparian has decided to unilaterally declare Jesse Singal to not be a transphobe, despite, and this is what's really wild, Jesse Singal literally talking to whistleblowers at a medical facility that appear to have made some significant HIPAA violations about their patients in sharing the information that they did with Jesse Singal. And of course, you have him running around spewing all of the same transphobic nonsense that basically your average transphobe is gonna be spreading. You know, the types of things about like, oh, we don't know about hormones, and oh, HRT for kids, and oh my god, it's so terrifying. Oh my goodness, they're turning all of our kids transgender.
I'm not the best qualified to discuss the full spectrum of topics under this umbrella, so I'm limiting my analysis to very specific parts of the discussion. This is where I took a timeout, researched Jesse Singal, and actually read the article Anna's referencing. Singal's both a notable journalist who's written for large publications like the New York Times, and a person who many progressives and trans rights organizations have labeled a transphobe. Did I find evidence of his transphobia? Absolutely. Is the article Anna's discussing transphobic? It didn't seem so, until I dug deeper. Since people call him a transphobe, let's analyze the author more closely first. There's many instances where he was accused of transphobia besides this article, but I'll focus on a couple. He has demonstrably lied about a teen receiving hormone therapy after a 10-minute assessment. When called out for lying about it by the teen in question on Twitter, he deleted the tweet and blamed everyone but himself for misconstruing the facts. Spreading dangerous lies and failing to take accountability for them is transphobic. In another instance, he was also accused of defending Dr. Kenneth Zucker while writing for The Cut in 2016. Zucker was accused of recommending gender-conforming techniques to convert kids to a cisgender standard, so like conversion therapy adjacent. Zucker maintains that wasn't accurate, but got fired from his clinic anyway after public pressure led to what he calls a show trial. I didn't think Singal's reporting rose to the level of transphobia here, since he also presents the criticisms of Zucker in very plain language throughout. This just felt like reporting to me until I read other people's opinions about it. This article by Lily Franks showed me what I was missing. Singal appears to have an agenda in his reporting from the outset, then does what he needs to do to arrive at that conclusion. In this case, he hyper-focused on one attack against Zucker that he could disprove, that Zucker called a child hairy little vermin when they took their shirt off. Turns out that didn't happen. What did happen is all the accounts from parents and patients that they were uncomfortable with their care, and that Zucker pushed them towards limiting rules and recommendations to get their behavior closer to cisgender kids. Cherry-picking your arguments ain't the move, Jesse. I've been guilty of it before, which is why I try to find information that disproves my biases. I presented those two examples to show that there's times where he's very clearly transphobic, and times where the answer wouldn't be as clear to a layperson. There's so many more examples of him attacking trans people for criticizing his work, encouraging social media mobs to go after them, and more. Those are in the cited sources doc in the description. In interest of time, I'll move on to the article he wrote for The Atlantic, because it's a big deal. The link is also in the description. I encourage y'all to read it and make up your own mind. Critics of his work, like GLAAD, G-L-A-A-D, insist that he focused too hard on rare cases of people who identify as detransitioned or desisted. Detransitioned refers to people who have stopped or reverted steps taken as part of a gender transition, while desisted refers to people who stopped or reverted their steps to socially transition but hadn't progressed to anything medical yet. I know there's competing definitions out there. Y'all bear with me. Those are the commonly accepted ones. They also accuse Singal of amplifying the phenomenon of social contagion, meaning children being influenced by social factors to become gender dysphoric. His article was literally used in court cases to strip transgender people of their rights. The worst part, he actively hid the fact that out of the 4 detransitioned people he interviewed, compared to the 2 happily transitioned people, already out of balance here, 3 of the detransitioned people were either directly associated with the anti-trans organization Fourth Wave Now, or, like the 4th one, they had a parent who was. This is deceptive and paints a very anti-trans picture of this article, in my view. Hidden agendas ain't cool when lives are at stake. Singal's defenders argue that he interviewed doctors, transgender teens, and adults who self-identify as happily transitioned, detransitioned, and desisted. Parents on all sides of the issue, scientists, affirming therapists, neutral therapists, etc. And he spent a lot of time reinforcing the idea that transgender people are valid, deserve affirming care, and face significant obstacles in our current society. If anything, his main point seems to be that rushed affirming care has consequences, but he clearly bent the methodology to arrive at that conclusion and presented a slanted view. I'll be very clear. I can't sum up Bonnie's reasons for leaving TYT based on one specific comment from Anna or one article by Singal, and it's not my place to try.
And I cannot, I will not, I refuse to lend any support to those views whatsoever, because fundamentally they're dangerous and they're ridiculous and like they're straight up evil.
What I will say is that Anna clearly hasn't vetted Singal enough to be dying on this hill, and that fits with the TYT approach when they get called out by the left. Lash out first, analyze later. Go with your gut feeling, despite the existence of so much evidence that you're uninformed at best and actively harming the people you're seeking to protect at worst.
But okay, you don't care about the politics? Let's just, for once in your life, think strategically about what that means. That means that you're gonna continue pushing the Democratic Party to unequivocally support everything that the trans activists want, even if it's unpopular among the electorate. That means they're not getting reelected. That means they're gonna lose to Republicans. Republican lawmakers who are passing draconian, disgusting legislation in various states right now as we speak against the transgender community.
Look at this. You're gonna push your Democratic Party to unequivocally support everything the trans activists want. Like, shut up. Literally, shut the fuck up. I think Anna Kasparian is genuinely personally transphobic. I'm just gonna say it right now. She's like saying and doing all of the things. She's referring to every trans person as a trans rights activist. Referencing every trans person as a trans rights activist is just, on its face, literally transphobic.
You know, like, shout out, I'm a queer black man, so shout out to all the queer folks who are on TYT, who were contributors at the time, who had their own little like Twitch shows as they were trying to get out onto Twitch as well. This really smart trans woman, went by Benny at the time, now Bonnie Carroll, who was on TYT. And when Anna was starting to listen to, I forget their names, but a lot of these like right-wing sort of like trans panic sort of substackers and journalists and things like that, and really falling for the, listen, I have nothing against the LGBTQ plus community, but can we talk about bathrooms and sports though? Like, you know, like just falling for all the tropes.
Right.
You had Bonnie, who is incredibly educated, truly one of the smartest people I have been blessed to know, who was breaking down on a biological level, on a sociological level, in a way that you could tell she was, yes, she was barely even speaking from lived experience. She was talking about papers in reputable journals that have studied this thing since before Anna or Ben Shapiro or any of these transphobes were but a twinkle in their father's eye, right? Despite all of this evidence, despite all this research, Anna was like, well, I look on Twitter and it seems like a lot of people are like this, so it's fine. And Jenks said something along the lines of, you know, I love my like radical lefty friends or whatever, stuff like that, but you're losing on this issue.
It's going to drive everyone away from you. And it's going to lead to a situation where it's harder to win those rights that we're all fighting for rather than easier to win.
People don't like the idea of giving trans people all these rights. I'm like, damn, nigga, like you know there was a point, in popular opinion where civil rights for black people was not popular.
That was my.
That doesn't mean you don't. Yeah, like, it doesn't mean you don't fight for it. They're rights.
And this whole idea of like, you're gonna lose the Republicans. You're gonna lose the Republicans if you cater to these trans people. Once again, is entirely debunked. Most people are fine with trans people, and when Republicans make their entire platform about attacking trans people, it actually does undermine their political success. We just live in a country that is very much not a democracy, that has all this gerrymandering and all these other things. And so Republicans still have like seats in a lot of places. I know, wild concept. But genuinely, if you look at their poll numbers in response to them focusing on just trans people existing, it's not working.
This is just true. I went to the Human Rights Campaign site and they have a whole article about all the races Republicans have lost, trying to focus exclusively on hating trans people. Hey, let's check out Georgia. I live in Atlanta. Turns out Herschel Walker, the ex-football player with half his brain missing, lost his runoff race by damn near 3 whole polling points, partially because he hammered trans people so hard. Herschel Walker's gonna come back up in this story later. Stay tuned.
Political commentator Anna Kasparian of the progressive network The Young Turks, who famously a few years ago declared herself politically unaligned and spent the run-up to the 2024 election and most of 2025 gracing right-wing shows, not to challenge but to find common ground with them, the ground right over the bodies of trans people.
Is it bad that I don't want to see a dick in the women's locker room? Is that bad?
No. At minimum, politically, I would not do that. I think that it puts people off, they're confused by it, and especially conservatives. I mean, you're never gonna get conservatives anyway, but maybe conservative independents, right? They're scared of change, right? And all of a sudden, when they hear something so foreign to them, they go, "Oh, hell no, no, no! I'm not. Nobody's gonna call me a birthing person. I'm a mother, right?" And especially on an issue like that.
I kind of put my foot down, and on my own platforms, I was starting to interview the contributors who were being let go of, not necessarily because of their numbers. They were doing great numbers, but because they were arguing with Cenk and Anna too much. And you know what? They were being honest that if you say trans rights accept this, that's transphobic, take it to the bank. And they didn't like that, but they were apparently fine with, you know, multiple people sexual harassment, multiple people who were like rabid Zionists on their network, multiple people like, you know, like all this other different stuff, usually giving them a pass because they had 5 figures of followers on Twitter. It's just not journalism.
Quick pause. We addressed anti-Zionism earlier, and it's true that Cenk and Anna don't necessarily have any stances that are Zionist. But if they're letting people on their network, like the Jimmy Dores and the Dave Rubins of the world, get away with being so far right and so Zionist, then that's on them too. They're responsible for their network.
I was scheduled to be on Rashad Richey's show, and their producer told me that I was taken off the show. The week that I was starting to talk about all this stuff very publicly and wasn't mincing words, and I was hosting people who were former TYT people who weren't mincing words.
That is
like,
yeah,
and I know that was not Rashad Richey's decision. That was not that producer's decision. That came from much higher. Yep.
I'm going to talk about this a lot more later, but Cenk is much more obsessed with what's popular and what's going to put off the Republicans than he ever will be with actually growing a backbone and doing the right thing. The Young Turks core values page is full of statements that make it clear that they're never going to do this kind of thing. Either they forgot what it says or they sold out. Either way, both of y'all are tripping. Y'all remember the Occupy protests? A lot of people really angry, focused on holding corporations accountable for their bullshit. Now, do you remember Citizens United? Big case, Supreme Court decided that campaign donations can come from corporations because they might as well be people. Why not? In 2011, Cenk introduced Wolf-PAC, a political action committee solely dedicated to reversing Citizens United. Sounds great, right? There's a couple problems with it though. For one, Wolf-PAC worked with really destructive right-wing organizations like ALEC extensively to achieve their goal of creating a constitutional convention. Hold up. There's 2 terms in that sentence that most people probably aren't familiar with. ALEC, A-L-E-C, is a group of right-wing lobbyists and political leaders that want to rewrite the Constitution. A constitutional convention is the same thing that took place in 1787, a bunch of white men getting together to debate and ratify the Constitution. Now you're all caught up. Problem is, a group like ALEC wants to rewrite the Constitution for entirely different reasons than Wolf-PAC says they do. We're talking about an organization that supported the big lie about Trump really winning the 2020 election. What is this holding hands kumbaya shit? More evidence adding to the pile, supporting my main point. The Young Turks are putting results that benefit their public image ahead of basic principles. Their site claims, quote, big money donors are rigging elections, end quote, and that you're in the right place to fight corruption. But how is that the case when you're partnering with corrupt groups to achieve that? I'll be super clear. I don't know if they're still working with them right now, but there is no reason they ever should have been collaborating, because there's no world in which ALEC or any group like them would ever create a situation where an Anti-Citizens United amendment would succeed. These constitutional conventions you say you want would specify that each state gets 1 vote. That means red states, which only represent 1/3 of our population, get to determine those amendments. Beautiful. Just so y'all know, I'm not making loose insinuations. Wolf-PAC testified as neutral in a hearing about COSA's convention application. That's one of these far-right groups. When one of the original founders of COSA, Michael Ferris, used to be president of Alliance Defending Freedom, which is a conservative Christian hate group. These are the people y'all are kicking it with. All that both sides talk he was popping off earlier makes a lot of sense now, doesn't it? Pause that and read it if you need to. In 2024, footage of at least 7 to 10 armed minorities in an apartment building hit the internet in the middle of a dispute between a terrible landlord and his tenants. The landlord was facing lawsuits for not handling bugs, repairs, and tenant complaints, and hired a PR firm that specialized in planting news stories. Shortly after, the landlord claimed the Venezuelan gang Tren de Aragua had taken over his apartment building's empty units and was extorting residents. This man had 3 buildings, and all of them had similar problems, but this was the only one that forced the landlord to come up with an excuse, because his tenants sued him. Fox News and every other right-wing outlet ran with the gang story for obvious reasons, and TYT took the bait hard.
You're watching footage from last August featuring members of the Venezuelan gang Tren de Aragua breaking into an apartment unit in Aurora, Colorado. Now, a shooting later broke out in the building's parking lot. And there's also some video footage that shows armed men confronting a driver in the parking lot of the apartment complex. Let's put that up. But apparently, this particular apartment complex, according to some of the residents and former residents, has been riddled with all sorts of gang violence over the last year. But this incident has sparked a big debate and I believe some gaslighting about whether or not there is a problem with Venezuelan migrant gangs basically taking over apartment buildings or causing violent crimes at these apartment buildings. The mayor of Aurora, Colorado, admitted that there actually is a problem with Venezuelan gangs. Aurora's interim police chief said that the gangs had not taken over one of the complexes. Now, depending on what you're hearing different things. And whether or not this is a widespread problem in Aurora, Colorado remains to be seen. Let's be clear about that. But the issue of this Venezuelan gang carrying out violent acts and crimes in the area, there seems to be a lot of evidence of that, while the Democratic lawmakers and leaders in the state and local level want to pretend like it's not happening at all.
What I blame them for is believing the claim that these were Venezuelans with no hard proof. The fact that they ignored information about conservatives inventing the city's gang problem. And the claim that there's a gang violence problem, which is a completely different thing from a gang taking over one building. The city council admitted that the city's Venezuelan gang problem was their opinion and said that, quote, their opinions aren't up for debate, end quote. What? TYT had access to this story by 9 News because it was published the same time that this event happened. They chose to focus in on this whole Democrat politicians are gaslighting us storyline instead of the facts, which is that this is propaganda. Is there a Tren de Aragua presence in Aurora? Absolutely. Is it a massive gang violence problem that extends to multiple buildings? And did they take over this building? No, and they shouldn't have reported it in the first place. Jurinsky, the same person that dropped that quote, also accused Tren de Aragua of being behind this large crowd that gathered at a local mall when the Venezuelan election results came out. Spoiler alert, they were there to celebrate the expected fall of Nicolas Maduro. You know, the guy we kidnapped from Venezuela? This feeds into Anna's narrative of being victimized by the left. It just gives her more reasons to move away. TYT took this extremely nuanced story with conflicting evidence and screamed at us about it with the most white suburban housewife energy I've ever seen.
The interim police chief said that the residents making complaints about the gang's activity have largely been migrants who live in the buildings. Why are we allowing them to be victimized by this? This is ridiculous.
Who said nothing's being done? You said yourself there's an investigation already underway. This is what happens when you have a 24/7 outrage machine to fill in every day. For another example of how they're not walking the walk, let's break down their 180 on the unhoused population. Jeffrey Katzenberg, the DreamWorks exec who tried and failed to get us to watch vertical TV shows on Quibi, invested $20 million in TYT via WonderCo, which Jank announced on air while claiming that they'd stay progressive and independent in their coverage. Cool. If you follow through with that, then there's no problem. Jeffrey Katzenberg's been indirectly pulling the strings, just like Bezos at the Washington Post. Here's an example. He flexed his influence in getting homelessness criminalized in LA after meeting with most of the city council members in the week before the council voted. 4 of the people he met with said that he wanted to know why so many tents are on the sidewalks and what could be done to deliver additional resources. That's great, right? But two sources said he wanted to be helpful at first, but quickly moved towards enacting limits on where people can sleep and talking about tents down, which is eventually what happened. What happened not long after that? Anna advocated for anti-camping laws on TYT.
One of those terrible decisions is essentially doing away with anti-camping laws, right? Allowing people to camp out wherever they want, whenever they want. And if, like, we have a homeless problem in California. We have it all throughout the country, but it's particularly bad in California. And so the argument is, well, if there isn't public housing available for people, they should be allowed to camp out.
Talking about how there's sufficient housing and that unhoused people don't want to take it.
Okay, but there's also a problem right now where there is public housing available and individuals will say, no, I don't want to take it. I don't want to follow the rules in the public housing. And so as a result, I would rather camp out.
What the hell are you talking about? Since when is there sufficient housing for the unhoused in LA? They dropped that video in 2021. That wasn't the case in 2021. It wasn't the case in 2023 either. It damn sure ain't the case in 2026. Y'all didn't provide any evidence for that claim. Where did that come from? Anna. It came from Anna. The facts disagree. And y'all are supposed to be the ones reporting the facts no matter what, regardless of popularity. Let's throw it back to how they used to cover this same issue when discussing homelessness in Las Vegas.
Homelessness continues to be a giant problem in many big cities throughout the country, and the city council in Las Vegas has decided to approach this in the worst possible way. They are essentially citing homeless individuals who sleep on the streets. The Las Vegas City Council is slated to vote on an ordinance that would make it illegal to camp or sleep on the streets in parts of the city. Drafted in September, the ordinance would make it a misdemeanor to rest, sleep, or lodge in Las Vegas's downtown district and other residential areas if shelter beds are available. Now, here's part of the problem. Most of the time, there aren't enough, actually all the time, there aren't enough shelter beds available for homeless people to find any, refuge in.
She makes the point that there aren't enough beds available and that these violations are criminalizing people unfairly. Those criminal records make future work more difficult, creating a cycle of poverty. The takeaway is clear. The Young Turks is for sale, and all these flip-flops directly contradict what Cenk was claiming to do with Wolf-PAC. I'm not a VC-funded network like TYT, but I have to make decisions on whether or not to sell out my audience every day. It's a simple decision. Do you value money or your reputation more? I acknowledge that it probably feels different to stare down tens of millions of dollars rather than the thousands I deal with. But is it really that different? What's the price tag on your self-respect? As promised, I want to turn to Jack Gerard, TYT's COO and occasional acting CEO during Cenk's political campaign. His LinkedIn tells a pretty clear story. He's still the acting chief operating officer, was the chief administrative officer during the unionization drama, and came to TYT after running Kaiser Permanente as their executive director of national product management. In case none of that landed for you, Kaiser Permanente is a healthcare corporation. His job as executive director was to manage national medical insurance products valued at over $1.4 billion, according to his own job description. When we talked about the union-busting firms TYT hired, when we talk about the funding round they completed with Katzenberg's VC group, the exploitation and termination of employees, he's an integral part of the story. I wasn't in any of their meetings, but it's not a stretch to lay the company's shift towards the right at his feet too. It made business sense, and his specialty as a healthcare exec was making money at the expense of ethics and morals. My last point about the TYT squad is about their partnership with Polymarket, the crypto betting platform where you can bet on real-life events, like political campaigns. I don't think I need to explain why that's not a good look for a progressive organization. It's funded by billionaire Peter Thiel, the venture capitalist who co-founded PayPal and backed Facebook. He founded a hedge fund and Palantir, a big data analysis company.
I got no love for Peter Thiel. He has done massive damage to this country. He backed Donald Trump 100%. He backed the lunatics, J.D. Vance and Blake Masters. Just disgusting people who spread hatred and fear and lies in this country. So don't mistake what I'm saying for as any defense of Peter Thiel. Live from the Polymarket studios. What is this? It's hilarious. I love it. I think it's a perfect sponsor for us.
This partnership renamed their crowd-funded, independent Studio of the People to Polymarket Studios. That's like when the Heats Arena got renamed for FTX. I want to sit in on the crypto corporate partnership section of future economics classes. That shit's going to be hilarious. Regardless of how often you claim your content won't be compromised by these massive corporate sponsorships, it simply isn't true.
When you see like Anna's continued shift towards being willing to hear the right-wing, angles of scapegoating migrants, scapegoating people of color, and you hear some of Cenk's things about, oh, let's meet them in the middle. Let's listen to these people. These people are reasonable. Oh, there's Jimmy. There's Ben Glebe. Yeah, I know I disagree with them, but let's give them the benefit of the doubt. That benefit of the doubt was not given to, in my strong leftist opinion, the most important people who were there. The workers, the staff, the ones who stayed after the hosts, the ones who came in before the hosts, the ones who would sacrifice their social lives, their professional and financial sort of prospects because they believed in the mission.
It's like a politician accepting money from endless corporations and trying to tell us those companies donated for years and got nothing in return. We've laid out some of the right-wing views and exploitative practices already. But even if it's only advertising, that's still unacceptable. You can't fundraise from viewers, claim they're your bosses on your site, and then pull a Facebook. I mean, it's a free country. You can. You just can't call yourselves progressives after doing so.
Just because it's not popular or not polling well doesn't mean you don't fight for it. After the 2024 election, when Trump won, the idea from Cenk and Anna was like, okay, listen, the right-wingers have a point. Tucker Carlson, he's a populist. He's against wars. I think he's going to convince the right wing that they're going to be against wars. And you know what? I want to do a speaking tour. I want to talk to the populist right. I want to talk to the Tucker Carlsons. I want to talk to the Charlie Kirks and Anna Kasparian. I want to talk to the Ben Shapiros. And Cenk specifically said, the problem with leftists is that you just can't have a beer with them. Charlie Kirk, I can have a beer with, and we can agree and disagree. And I would, paraphrase, Cenk could say, I believe, I believe people of color should have rights. And Charlie Kirk can go, shut up, Turk. Shut up, you greasy Turk. I don't care. Martin Luther King Jr. was, a menace to society. At the end of the day, Cenk can go have a beer with that. I'm like, no. I can have there's a difference between my best friends from high school and their parents who maybe have voted Republican most of the time, but I can have a conversation with them and they're not disrespecting my race or my family or my gender identity because I've grown up with their kid. Right. And they can have some reasonable points. And frankly, because of me, they stopped watching as much Fox News. They started to, align with some Democrats. Like, there's a difference between that kind of discourse and people whose professional jobs it is, the Charlie Kirks, the Ben Shapiros, the Tucker Carlsons, the professional jobs it is to distort.
I get that running an indie news network is hard, and you got to chase the bag to an extent. I'm on a much smaller scale, and I have sponsors, including political ones. That's how I'm able to interview politicians on the issues I care about. I used to need those sponsors just to survive financially. However, I've never let that funding compromise my brand or my morals. My audience would absolutely tear me apart. Y'all are way too smart to not know what this pattern of behavior and business moves is doing to your integrity.
I used to proudly put on my LinkedIn that I worked with Anna Kasparian. I can't do that anymore. Not only just because she has made this right-leaning shift, I could give a good goddamn, right? But it's because her practice of journalism has diminished. She's not rigorous. She's more just trying to be like everything that she was supposedly fighting against in the 10 years that I had known of her, which is, stenographer journalism. This side says this side says this, we'll have to leave it there. Or we'll have to try to find something in the middle in order to appease some radical centrist, right?
We can't trust y'all anymore. I'm done making my point about the Young Turks, and I promised y'all I'd tie up my saga with Rashad Richey in this video. So, let's land that plane. For those who weren't paying attention in the intro, he announced that he was suing me in one of his 2 response videos a couple weeks back, after I showed the world that he's a pathological liar.
You will be receiving a letter this week. If not this week, next week. You are being sued. Not only are you being sued by me, you're being sued by others. The institutions that you decided to defame are suing you as well. I'm giving you fair notice, fair warning. I'm sure I'm not supposed to tell you this, but I am.
Then, he had his reporter homie Bobeth Yates write a fake investigation article in the Atlanta Voice. She also dropped a video. How did you conduct a whole investigation, but your only source is Rashad Richey himself? You didn't talk to Dr. Rockwood. That quote is from years ago. You didn't introduce any documents that he hadn't already shared on his YouTube that were heavily debunked by everybody who watched it. Y'all couldn't even stage the interview correctly.
Maybe I have more curiosity than the average person. But the reality is, it's not about the degrees. I've never shouted, I have a bunch of degrees.
It is about the degrees. I also mentioned your Alzheimer's cure helmet, your fake university you created to scam students in Florida in 2024. Scroll down just a little bit and you see 4 black people, 2 of them who appear to be related, who are all running a diploma mill. And the fake scientific journal you published all these papers in. Why is the only journal you can get published in based in India? His lazy-ass YouTuber friends like Ben Dixon drop videos trying to defend him by analyzing my script with AI instead of watching the video.
I don't have a horse in this race, even though Dr. Rashad Richey is my brother from another mother.
The worst part? Richey accused me of voting for Herschel Walker. Bro, what? My first basis for the claim that Richey isn't a real progressive is that Richey has been directly tied to multiple far-right conservatives for both mentorship and career assistance over the past 25 years or so. John Kersey, the British conservative who ran a party that praised Hitler, opposes gays, and is anti-immigration, comes back in the story here. He created the network of institutions where Richey got at least 6 of those fraudulent postgraduate degrees I accused him of holding. Chancellor and professor positions at the same fake colleges Rashad Richey got his degrees from, Lightbulb, 1 from European American University, 2 from Université de la Renaissance d'Haïti, 2 from Universidad Empresarial in Costa Rica, and 1 from Western Orthodox University. Maybe that association isn't concrete enough for you. I can see that. Let's try this one. Rashad is mighty proud of his dissertation from Schofield Seminary, a super conservative seminary in Modesto, California, run by Kenny Rhodes. Rhodes once said in a sermon, after reading off a stat about how most kids don't believe in the Holy Spirit as a living entity, quote, "This is a crisis on so many levels. Not being convinced of what the Bible says, being more influenced by the culture than biblical Christianity. It is a crisis in the nature of truth itself," end quote. Believe what you want to believe, but Rhodes is a strong conservative. You'll see his influence on Richey once I start reading Richey's Schofield dissertation, which is my second basis for this claim. Remember, this is y'all's progressive hero that I'm supposedly tearing down unfairly. Here, he calls Marxism the ancestor of progressivism. For everybody watching this who's tired of hearing the term Marxist online, they're essentially calling you a communist who wants to completely tear down capitalism and have the community own the resources, which would then make society more equitable. I don't think it's fair to put an equal sign between these two, since I'm sure plenty of progressives are chasing down every bag within this capitalism trap, and plenty more would have big problems with the lack of freedom citizens can have under communist governments. I would count myself among them. Quote, "Progressive gender ideology would seem to have little to do with science itself. And in fact, it is telling that this gender ideology often neglects any reference to biology and actual science entirely," end quote. We've covered this, but the gender spectrum isn't an ideology. That implies that it's entirely fabricated by progressives and has no natural influences. Animals, which is a category we belong to, express a range of sexual behaviors, and our reproductive cells express in different ways outside of the 2-gender dichotomy from birth. This is the type of thing a conservative says. Here, he creates a wild straw man argument directed towards trans people, acting like progressives think a biological man or woman can magically transform into each other. Then, he not only claimed LGBT people have a collective agenda, but he thinks that agenda is to completely deny the scientific differences between a man and woman. They're not saying that, fam. You just made that up. This not only insults progressives' grip on what science is, it matches what conservatives cough up in their arguments. Here, he claims the average progressive is likely atheist. Here, he heavily implies that gay marriage opens the door to polygamy, a practice that's almost entirely practiced by heterosexual people. This also tracks with the need for conservatives to paint queer people as gateways to behavior they consider to be immoral. Whole time, straight men are the main ones doing it. Calls progressives Marxist again. Uses the constant expansion of the LGBT plus acronym to make a point about how progressives are out of touch with reality. I shouldn't have to address this, but I will. Some of those letters stand for gender identities, like non-binary and transgender. Some of them stand for sexualities and orientations, like ace or asexual, polyamorous, pansexual, etc. Anybody who's been on dating apps will recognize quite a few of these. The problem I see with conservatives who make claims like this is that they acknowledge some orientations while claiming others aren't real. Most of them know what bisexual means and have accepted that it's a real thing. But when they're criticizing the queer community, it's the gay men and trans women who catch all the static. Y'all don't like bi men, but bi women are focused on less somehow. Still discriminated against though. Y'all are selectively bigoted. Meanwhile, people who aren't interested in sex at all are also part of this community. Here, this man defends the ADF, the Alliance Defending Freedom, who we talked about earlier with Mike Johnson's ugly ass quote. Yeah, those people. He says that they're in fact nothing other than a defender of First Amendment protections of religious liberty. Yeah, okay. Here, Richie claims, quote, the notion that there is a multiplicity of genders is a purely philosophical or ideological affirmation that has almost literally nothing to do with established biological science, end quote. This is false. For everybody who's already mad at how much I've mentioned queer people in this video, this part is for you. Remember the most recent inauguration speech, which I didn't watch, when Trump said this?
As of today, it will henceforth be the official policy of the United States government that there are only two genders, male and female.
In all his executive orders that followed that, he defined the two genders like this. Female is the one with the larger reproductive cell at conception, while male is the one with the smaller reproductive cell at conception. Besides the fact that these traits don't actually show up until 6 weeks after conception, it doesn't track with how humans actually work. Or with science. This order was based on the 1972 work of Jeff Parker, who based it on the gametes, or reproductive cells, in men and women. Women have eggs, which are larger than sperm. All good so far, right? But nah, intersex people exist. They can be born with gametes that aren't fully viable, and some people don't produce gametes at all. If you're basing gender on the size of the reproductive cell, then what happens when someone's born different? I don't expect a lot of critical thought from extremist Republicans, but come on, Rashad. Ain't you supposed to be a renowned biophysicist? Denying the connections of science to the gender spectrum is extremely non-progressive, fam. Full stop. Believe it or not, I'm actually going to end this on a positive note. Many people told me to target Rashad Richey's involvement with Cop City, a big-ass police training facility in South DeKalb County. I live in North DeKalb. Launched by our mayor, Andre Dickens. I know him personally. He used to be my boss at Georgia Tech, back in the Stone Age. ACLU of Georgia, which fights for civil liberties, left the task force for this project after Manuel Esteban Paez Terán was shot and killed by police while they were trying to clear protesters out. There were thousands of protesters. The residents did not want this project to move forward. The release of Terán's autopsy, showing he was shot 13 times, triggered the ACLU's departure. Another reason was the fact that the first meeting for this task force had a closed-door policy. 2 weeks before the Atlanta City Council voted 11-4 to approve it, the city government announced it would cost $67 million, a number that ballooned as high as $90 million plus when it was all said and done. Rashad was appointed to an advisory committee for this project, by Mayor Dickens in March of 2023. And here's Rashad's comments about that appointment.
For full transparency, a few weeks ago, I was appointed to the Cop City Task Force by the mayor of Atlanta. I like the mayor of Atlanta. I have a lot of respect for him. He's wrong on this, okay? I was appointed to that committee. I know the official name of the committee. I don't call it that because that's not what mama them called it. I will call it the Cop City Committee, all right? Given what has continued to happen, given the reality of this movement being rejected by those who live in the city, somebody needs to rip up this damn contract, okay? Mama them in East Atlanta, where this facility is scheduled to be built. They don't want it. They don't want to hear helicopters while there's a mass shooting training. They don't want to see individuals come back and forth in militarized gear. This is not what they want for their community. Nobody posed the question to them.
I salute your coverage of the Cop City incident. I watched several videos y'all made about it, and they were all pretty good. I would speed up some of the teleprompter delivery, but I feel your passion. This is the version of you we legitimately need on the left. Not the version of you that built a religious grifter university with your friends in Florida, or falsified large parts of your academic history. Rashad claims my pieces have been executed in bad faith. If it was in bad faith, I would have blasted you for your criminal record like some other YouTubers have done already. I didn't, because I believe people can change, and it just wasn't relevant. I also could have brought up the text messages people sent me where you were harassing them during your time at the WAOK radio station. Or lit your ass up for using your blackness to dangle crazy white people in front of us in your Karen videos for clicks, while simultaneously claiming that you're fighting the good fight. If you want to wear that hero cape, you earn it by focusing on quality over quantity and being honest when you make mistakes. Like the one you made when you claimed I'm being sued. TYT, get it together. Dump all the right-wing sponsors and talking points, vet your hosts more carefully, and retire Jank and Anna. I really don't see a way back for those two. Their naked ambition and refusal to admit when they're wrong has very clearly overshadowed the mission. But just like I said to Rashad, y'all have done a lot of good work since 2005 and even before that. The clout and the money just seem to have y'all lost right now. Progressives are hard on our own, and I don't see it as counterproductive. I see it as a necessity so that we don't become the people we're condemning. Y'all got the information now. Can't say I didn't tell you. If y'all made it this far, thank you so much for watching all of this. It was easily the hardest video I've ever had to research and write and put together and film and edit. It was a lot of nights chained together of very little sleep, but it was worth it because on the progressive side of things, we often get bullied by our own for attacking our own. And that's not what I'm trying to do here. That's not what I'm trying to accomplish. I'm trying to hold a mirror up to the hypocrisy and the contradictions of the people we look up to in some cases, and make sure that all of y'all who look up to them are realizing when you're being sold right-wing ideas, realizing when they're drifting to the right, and making sure you're able to separate what's really progressive and what's really going to move us forward from clickbait and lies from a corporation who drives their employees like slaves and is only concerned with pumping out as many videos as possible, as opposed to giving you a very concentrated and very thought out presentation less often. I'm not saying I'm necessarily any better, but my viewers have told me that I've helped them steer clear of scams, become more educated on the financial tip when it comes to those scams, advocate for themselves, and even saved lives in the case of my fraternity expose video. I'm trying my best, and I will continue to improve and learn more. But me just quote unquote being a YouTuber or podcaster, according to Bobeth Yates, that is insufficient reason to not listen to the arguments that I'm putting forward. I literally could not have put this video together without the help and financial assistance of my Patreon supporters and YouTube members that y'all see on screen right now. Your faith in me as I figure out this journey through putting my ideas out there and doing research and fact checking and making sure that I'm holding people accountable. It means more than I can say, and I'm privileged to be in the position I'm in, to be able to create the things that I think need to be created. Subscribe if you want to see more videos. Make sure you hit the bell and press all, because YouTube's not going to show you my videos if you don't. And I'll catch y'all next time.